Bloody stupid, fucking stupid HEIC files. Who the fuck even uses these apart from iPhones? Fucking Apple. Hey up, folks. Darkstorm 2 bad here. It's a little bit of a story time this time, just in case you're interested in what happens in my precious little life. So, as anybody who's talked to me for a bit about what I like to do for fun will know, when I'm not being forced to serve customers with the spatial awareness of moss, or having adorable little worms blow each other to pieces, or having a gorgeous chubby climatologist introduce a bunch of fools to the Ice Age, I like to go out to the pub. It's a weekly tradition where we relax, draw, play board or card games, and have a bit of a drink and a laugh. Before moving on to a gaming pub where we hop onto some consoles, I get my arse handed to me if we play Gang Beasts, we lose at the quiz, and we have a bit of a drink and a laugh. Anyway, this evening began almost like any other. The difference being that I left a little bit earlier to grab a bite to eat at Wendy's and to have some quality time by myself, away from the cat. Don't get me wrong, she is adorable, but she's a bit of a demanding pillock. I gulped down my fantastic Baconator and headed off to the first pub, where I was surprised to find that I was the first of my group there. No problems there, just got a pint, found a table, whipped out my sketchbook and started drawing. It wasn't that long before the group started trickling in, but the first person to arrive was Chris. As a bit of backstory, Chris is just someone who kind of hangs around with us. Though he's mainly here because he likes Gideon. And looking at their interactions, I'd say Gideon tolerates him at best. Chris is kind of in his own little world, and doesn't see very much beyond what he wants. As a result, when we try to tell him about how we and others feel about his actions, the stuff we have to say tends to go in one ear, get bored and die. Naturally, I communicate with Chris as little as possible, and there's only so many times that can be ignored, talked over, and completely blanked before I feel like hitting my head against a brick wall will be a far more productive use of my time. So yeah, oddly enough, Chris sits down and actually says something to me. I mean, we get along about as well as a pig and a butcher, so it was a pleasant surprise. Unfortunately, the conversation only went as far as him being surprised that I was the first one there, and me explaining that I fancied a burger that exceeds 1,000 calories, before he just went on his phone. Amicable conversation ceased, I suppose. Oh well, back to drawing huge breasts! Soon enough, Gideon and Ted arrive, and Chris instantly moves to the table across from me. I didn't think anything of it. I wasn't sure if he, for some reason or another, intended to establish the group sitting at that table instead of where I was sat originally, but then it dawned on me that he likely just wanted to play card games. I'm pretty sure Chris is actually somewhere on the autistic spectrum, and his area of focus is on trading card games, whereas mine is on... What is my area of focus? Question for later. Anyway, Gideon's got himself a drink and intends to play some games, just as Chris was hoping for. However, Ted was building a deck and wanted to test it out, so Gideon said he'd give him a match first. This did not sit well with Chris. He demanded that he be played with first, but Gideon stood his ground, stated that Ted had actually asked him first, but he'd be happy to give him a match afterward. Chris just made a huffy noise and said, "Do what you want." "We will, thanks." It was around the same time Bob was on his way, and he suggested going to Wetherspoons for cheaper drinks. Now, as far as I know, Wetherspoons are still big Brexit supporters and treat their staff like shite, so I said I'd rather not. Gideon also stated that he likes the atmosphere of where we were, and he's going through some hard times, so I'd say he needs all the relaxation he can get. Bob's response was a little scathing, and I get the impression that he really wanted to get drunk that night. But, lo and behold, he came and joined us anyway. Bob can be a bit of a childish imp sometimes, but when it comes down to it, the difference between him and Chris is staggering. Pretty soon Wayne arrived, and the gang was all here. Ted asked Chris if he was okay, and if he wanted to join us. No response. I figured it was probably best to just leave him to it. He'll come to us when he's ready, after he realises that sulking when you don't get your way isn't the answer. That was my theory. In practice, he just got up and left. I thought he'd gone to Bog, but then he just didn't come back. Oh, he did message Gideon, whining about how there was no point in him bringing his decks out with him. What he failed to realise is that if he'd been patient and waited for Gideon and Ted to finish their game, then he'd still have been able to play. Is this what it means to cut off your nose to spite your face? So yeah, the night progressed as usual. Gideon and Ted played games, I carried on drawing, Dwayne continued being a connoisseur of fine spirits, we all just shot the shit, and then we headed off for the pub quiz. Bob was a little impatient, but we all got there in plenty of time. Something I didn't expect, I don't think any of us expected it really, is that when we arrived at the gaming bar, Chris was there. I grabbed my usual picture, went over and tried to talk to him. No response. Now this I did expect. Here's where Bob suggested we just go grab a console at the polar opposite end of the pub and leave him to it. Was this on the spiteful side? Yes. Was it the wrong thing to do in this situation? Absolutely not. Even with how immature Bob can be sometimes, he definitely recognises that kicking your toys out at pram and blanking everyone isn't behaviour that should be rewarded. Hell, you don't see me or Dwayne acting like that. I don't even rage when games don't go my way anymore, and I haven't done for a long time. I'll still get miffed if people online are annoying me or just won't leave me alone, but I'm getting better at that too. Every day, it gets a little bit easier. You gotta do it every day, that's the hard part. But it does get easier. As for Dwayne, I don't recall seeing him lose his cool at all. Yeah, we'll have choice words for annoying people on Overwatch, but he'll never raise his voice or anything like that. It's pretty admirable. So that's two of our group confirmed on the spectrum. One I'm speculating might be, one who we've thought about but he doesn't know, and one where we have no idea whatsoever because the subject hasn't been brought up. This information is just so I can tell anyone who tries to use this to justify Chris's actions to smeg off. And likely so they can report me to YouTube for telling them to smeg off. The night progresses, we start on our drinks and games, and Ted has to set off home. But not long after that, Chris comes over to our table. Oddly enough, he's giggling, saying something about how he figured we'd go to the table he was on or something. I don't quite remember what he said. Gideon responded by saying that Chris had just disappeared without a word and we didn't know what was going on. Chris said, "Yeah, well, I was getting kind of bored and nobody was talking to me." Still with a shit-eating grin on his face, like we were supposed to feel sorry for him and he was ready to milk it. I, without missing the beat, said, "Well, Ted tried." He just looked at me. His face fell, and he said nothing. I was contemplating saying that I'd tried as well, but I think at that moment I'd already made my point. After that, I didn't really pay much attention as I was far too busy killing undead knobheads on Doom 2, and answering quiz questions when I had said answers. At some point, Chris went home, not even saying goodbye to any of us except Gideon. Gideon said that he has a lot on his plate at the moment, and I won't go into details, but his stance was that he didn't have the energy to try and keep everyone happy. My question to him was whether or not it's his responsibility. No, of course it's not. Especially when said person caused his own misery by throwing a tantrum because he didn't get his way, and acting like the whole group ditched him when in fact he was the one who did that. Bob would have much preferred to start at a Weatherspoons, but he didn't try to sour the whole group over it. He just had a jab or two when he arrived and then moved on. We're all responsible for our own happiness, and we have our feelings of happiness and camaraderie coalesce with one another. The night ended with no further incident, though Bob and I ended up taking playful, literal jabs at each other. Sometimes I kind of think we have a sibling rivalry thing going on. It's kind of fun. With me interchanging the talk between Chris and Bob, you might be thinking that Bob is the second toddler throwing a tantrum. But that isn't the case. You see, the way Chris acted reminded me of a friendship that deteriorated years ago. This guy, who I'll call Gary, was someone I knew in secondary school. He was also on the spectrum. In fact, we were part of the same integrated resource unit. I used to hang out with him quite often, but over about a year or two, he became steadily more and more resentful of life for some reason. Mainly over not being able to get a girlfriend. Yep, he was slipping right into nice guy, neckbeard incel territory. The way Chris acted reminded me of a time when Gary and Dwayne were over at my place. Dwayne and I were playing Smash Bros. Brawl, and I think it might have been around the time I was learning how to dodge, but Gary was just laid on the bed on the opposite side of the room for some reason. We both asked him to come over and join us, and I had invited both of them over to play games after all, but he just refused. When it was clear that the friendship was over, he actually had the nerve to say that we were the ones ignoring him. Gary shut us out. Dwayne and I tried to talk to him. Chris shut us out. Ted and I tried to talk to him. How does the same smeg happen to the same guy twice? Anyway, the story's done, so I think I'll finish it the way the Irish finish their fairy tales. And then they all died. I know, it sounds morbid, but the story's ended, so the characters no longer exist. Sure, we're all real people, but I'm using fictional characters to stand in for us, so... yeah, they died. At least until the next time. How have you liked Storytime, by the way? If the vid gets a like, I might do another one. But for now, I've been Docs on Too Bad. Thanks for coming to my Tip Talk, and I'll see you later. In a bit. Yeah!